The acrid smell of smoke crept through the floorboards long before Eleanor Hayes could see the flames, but by then it was too late. The heavy cellar door was already bolted from the outside, leaving her trapped in the dusty darkness beneath the general store. It was 1878 in Knights Ferry, California, and the young woman who had come west to escape her troubled past now faced a death more terrifying than any she could have imagined. Eleanor pressed her shoulder against the rough wooden door, panic rising in her chest as she coughed through the thickening smoke. At 23, she had already endured more hardship than most twice her age, but the thought of dying alone in this cellar sent fear coursing through her veins like ice water. The sound of crackling flames grew louder above, and she could feel the heat intensifying. Time was running out. Help. She screamed, her voice cracking with desperation as she pounded her fists against the unyielding door. Please, someone help me. Samuel Marshall had only been passing through Knights Ferry on his way to Sacramento when he noticed the orange glow lighting up the night sky. The 30-year-old cowboy had spent the last decade drifting across the western frontier, working cattle drives and breaking horses from Texas to Montana. He'd seen his share of trouble, but something about the frantic shouts coming from the burning general store sent him running without a second thought. "Anybody in there?" he called out, approaching the building as flames began to consume the front porch. The heat pushed him back, but the unmistakable sound of a woman's screams drove him forward. Following the cries, Samuel circled around to the side of the building where the flames hadn't yet reached. A small storm cellar door was visible, and the screams were clearly coming from below. Without hesitation, he dropped to his knees, finding the door secured with a heavy padlock. "Stand back," he shouted, pulling his revolver from its holster. Samuel fired at the lock, the bullet ricocheting off the metal. Cursing, he holstered the gun and looked around desperately, spotting an axe leaning against a nearby woodpile. Eleanor had nearly given up hope when she heard the deep voice calling down to her. "I'm here, in the cellar," she cried out, her voice hoarse from smoke and screaming. The sound of wood splintering sent a surge of relief through her body. Samuel brought the axe down with all his might, the blade biting into the weathered wood. 3 more powerful swings and the door began to give way. With a final blow, he shattered the remaining planks and reached down into the darkness. "Give me your hand," he called out, feeling the heat intensifying around them as the fire spread. The building groaned ominously above, timbers beginning to shift and crack under the assault of the flames. Eleanor reached upward, her soot-covered fingers finding his strong grip. With one powerful motion, Samuel pulled her from the cellar and into his arms. He didn't wait to see if she could walk. The building was seconds away from collapse. Lifting her against his chest, he turned and ran as fast as his legs would carry them, not stopping until they reached the safety of the town square, where a bucket brigade had already formed. "Thank you," Eleanor whispered, her green eyes meeting his as he gently set her down on a bench. "You saved my life." "Samuel Marshall," he said simply, removing his bandana and offering it to her to wipe the soot from her face. "Most folks just call me Sam." "Eleanor Hayes," she replied, accepting the cloth with trembling hands. "I worked at the general store." "What in heaven's name were you doing locked in that cellar, Miss Hayes?" Sam asked, his brow furrowing with concern. Behind them, the store's roof collapsed in a shower of sparks that lit up the night sky. Eleanor's face darkened and she turned away. "It's a long story, Mr. Marshall." "Well," Sam said, his voice gentle as he looked at the shell-shocked woman before him, "it seems we've got plenty of time now." As the townspeople battled the blaze that threatened to spread to neighboring buildings, Eleanor reluctantly began to tell her story. She had come to Knights Ferry 6 months prior, seeking work after fleeing an arranged marriage in Boston. Mr. Winters, the store owner, had offered her employment and lodging, but over time his behavior had grown increasingly inappropriate. When she refused his advances that evening, his rage had been terrifying. "He said he was going to teach me a lesson," Eleanor explained, her voice barely audible over the commotion surrounding them. "I never imagined he would leave me there too." Her voice trailed off, unable to speak the awful truth. Sam's jaw tightened as the implications became clear. "And where is Mr. Winters now?" he asked, his tone dangerously controlled. Eleanor pointed toward a man being questioned by the sheriff across the square. "There. He's telling everyone it was an accident with a lamp." Sam rose to his feet, but Eleanor caught his arm. "Please don't," she pleaded. "I have nowhere to go now, no job, no possessions. I can't afford trouble with the law." The cowboy hesitated, torn between the desire for justice and the fear in her eyes. Finally, he nodded and sat back down beside her. "You're safe now," he promised, "and we'll figure something out." As the night wore on, the townspeople managed to contain the fire to just the general store and the adjacent livery stable. The sheriff, a gruff man named Harkins, eventually made his way over to speak with Eleanor. Sam stayed protectively by her side. "Miss Hayes," the sheriff began, "Mr. Winters claims you knocked over a lamp while cleaning the store before closing. Says he thought you'd already gone home for the night." Eleanor's hands clenched in her lap. "That's not true, Sheriff. He locked me in the cellar deliberately after I refused his attentions." The sheriff's expression revealed nothing. "That's a serious accusation, young lady. You have any proof?" "I saw the padlock myself," Sam interjected, "had to break down the door to get her out." Sheriff Harkins studied Sam for a long moment. "And who might you be, stranger?" "Samuel Marshall, just passing through when I saw the fire." The sheriff scratched his beard thoughtfully. "Well, Mr. Marshall, I appreciate your heroics, but this is a matter for local authorities." "With all due respect, Sheriff," Sam said firmly, "that man tried to murder Miss Hayes. Are you telling me you're not going to investigate?" Before the sheriff could respond, a commotion broke out near the smoldering remains of the store. George Winters had bolted, shoving past several townspeople in his rush to escape. The sheriff cursed and hurried after him, leaving Sam and Eleanor alone once more. "What will you do now?" Sam asked gently. Eleanor stared at the glowing embers of what had been her workplace and home. "I don't know," she admitted. "I have some savings, but not enough to get me back east, and I'm not sure I want to go back anyway." Sam was silent for a long moment. "I've got a small cattle operation about 20 miles south of here," he finally said. "It's nothing fancy, just a few hundred acres I've been building up the past couple years. Been thinking of hiring some help." He cleared his throat. "There's a cabin for the ranch hand. You'd have your privacy." Eleanor looked at him with surprise. "You'd offer employment to a woman you just met." "Madam, I've got a fair eye for character," Sam replied with a slight smile, "and anyone who's survived what you have tonight deserves a fighting chance." Eleanor considered his offer. She had few options, and something about the quiet cowboy's steady presence made her feel safe for the first time in months. "I don't know the first thing about ranch work," she admitted. "Can you cook?" Sam asked. "Yes, quite well actually." "Can you keep accounts, order supplies?" Eleanor nodded. "I managed all the bookkeeping for Mr. Winters." "Then you already know more than me about half the operation," Sam said with a chuckle. "I can handle the cattle and horses, but I'm no good with figures." By dawn, as the last of the embers died away, Eleanor had made her decision. She would accompany Samuel Marshall to his ranch, at least until she could determine her next steps. The sheriff had returned empty-handed. Winters had disappeared into the night, but promised to send word if he was apprehended. 2 days later, after purchasing necessities to replace what she had lost in the fire, Eleanor found herself riding beside Sam on the dusty trail south of Knights Ferry. The early spring sun warmed her shoulders as they traveled through rolling hills dotted with oak trees and wildflowers. "It's beautiful country," she remarked, taking in the vast landscape so different from the cramped streets of Boston. "That it is," Sam agreed, his eyes scanning the horizon with obvious affection. "Took me nearly 10 years of drifting before I found this piece of land. Knew right away it was where I wanted to put down roots. How did you come to be passing through Knights Ferry that night?" Eleanor asked, curiosity finally overcoming her exhaustion. Sam adjusted his hat against the sun. "Had to deliver some papers to a lawyer in Sacramento. Was heading back when I saw the smoke." He glanced at her. "Guess it was good timing." "Divine providence, my mother would have called it," Eleanor said softly. By mid-afternoon, they crested a hill that revealed a modest ranch spread below them. A small but well-built house stood on a rise, with a barn, corral, and bunkhouse nestled nearby. A creek wound through the property, its banks lined with cottonwood trees. Several dozen cattle grazed in the nearest pasture. "It's not much," Sam said, suddenly self-conscious, "but it's mine, every nail and board paid for." "It's wonderful," Eleanor replied honestly. After the crowded confines of Boston and the small room above the general store, the openness of the ranch felt like freedom. Sam showed her to the small cabin that would be hers, a simple one-room structure with a bed, table, stove, and chair. "It's basic," he apologized, "but tight against the weather. The previous hand kept it neat enough." "What happened to him?" Eleanor asked, setting down her small bag of new belongings. "Headed to the gold fields up north," Sam explained. "Been managing alone these past 2 months, but it's getting to be too much with calving season coming." That evening, Eleanor insisted on cooking dinner as a small repayment for Sam's kindness. She found his kitchen surprisingly well stocked, if somewhat disorganized. Using the ingredients available, she prepared a hearty beef stew and biscuits that brought a genuine smile to Sam's normally reserved face. "If your ranch work matches your cooking, Miss Hayes, I believe I've made the best hire in California," he said, accepting a second helping. "Eleanor, please," she corrected gently, "and thank you, but I still have much to learn about ranching." "We'll start tomorrow," Sam promised. Nothing too difficult at first. The following weeks established a rhythm to their days. Sam woke before dawn to tend to the horses and begin the day's work, while Eleanor prepared breakfast and packed lunches they could eat in the field. She proved a quick study, learning to manage the chickens and vegetable garden that had been sadly neglected in recent months. Sam found her to be a natural with the horses, her gentle touch calming even the most skittish colts. Though physically demanding, the work agreed with Eleanor. Color returned to her cheeks, and the haunted look that had shadowed her eyes began to fade. For his part, Sam discovered that having Eleanor on the ranch brought unexpected pleasure to his solitary existence. Her quiet efficiency transformed the main house from a functional space into something that felt like a home. Fresh curtains appeared at the windows, wildflowers graced the table, and the sense of home-cooked meals replaced the simple fare he'd subsisted on for years. One evening, about a month after her arrival, Eleanor was hanging laundry when Sam approached, looking unusually hesitant. "Got word from Sheriff Harkins today," he said, removing his hat. "They found Winters." Eleanor's hands stilled on the damp shirt she was pinning to the line. "Where?" "Stockton. Got caught trying to rob a bank." Sam watched her carefully. "Sheriff wants you to come testify about what happened that night." Eleanor turned away, her shoulders tense. "I don't want to see him again." "I know," Sam said gently, "but if you don't, he might go free." "And what of my reputation?" Eleanor asked, her voice barely audible. "Once people hear he locked me in that cellar because I refused his advances, they'll assume the worst about me." Sam stepped closer, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "Eleanor, you did nothing wrong, and I'll be with you every step of the way." She looked up at him, vulnerability and strength mingling in her gaze. "You would do that?" "Without question," he replied simply. 3 days later, they traveled to the county courthouse in Stockton. Eleanor's testimony was clear and dignified, despite the whispers and stares that followed her. Sam remained steadfastly by her side, his quiet presence lending her courage when it faltered. When George Winters was led into the courtroom, Eleanor's composure nearly broke at the sight of his smug face. But she held firm, recounting the events of that terrible night with unwavering honesty. When the defense attorney suggested she had encouraged Winters' attentions, Sam's hand tightened on the bench beside her, his knuckles white with restraint. The trial lasted 2 days, at the end of which Winters was convicted of attempted murder and sentenced to 20 years in prison. As they left the courthouse, Eleanor felt a weight lift from her shoulders. "It's over," she breathed, closing her eyes against the bright afternoon sun. "You were magnificent in there," Sam said, admiration evident in his voice. "Braver than any man I've ever ridden with." The journey back to the ranch was quieter, both lost in their own thoughts. Something had shifted between them during those difficult days, a deepening of trust, perhaps, or a recognition of the strength they found in each other's presence. Summer arrived with long, sun-drenched days that kept them both working from dawn until dusk. Eleanor's responsibilities on the ranch had grown as she mastered new skills. She now handled all the business correspondence, kept the accounts in perfect order, and had expanded the vegetable garden to provide most of their daily needs. Sam found himself watching her more often than he should, admiring the graceful way she moved and the intelligence that shone in her eyes. He'd known many women in his years of drifting, but none had affected him the way Eleanor did, with her quiet determination and unexpected humor that emerged as she grew more comfortable in her new life. One particularly hot afternoon, Sam returned from checking the north pasture to find Eleanor attempting to repair the water pump that supplied the house. She was flushed with exertion, her sleeves rolled up and hair falling loose from its usual neat arrangement. Having trouble? He asked, dismounting to investigate. "It's the seal, I think," she explained, wiping her forehead with the back of her hand. "The water barely trickles out." Sam knelt beside her, their shoulders brushing as he examined the mechanism. The casual contact sent a jolt through him that had nothing to do with the summer heat. "I believe you're right," he said, his voice suddenly rough. "I've got some leather pieces in the barn we can cut to size." Eleanor followed him to the barn, where the interior was mercifully cooler. As Sam rummaged through a tool chest, she found herself studying the strong lines of his profile, the way his dark hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck. When had her feelings for her employer shifted into something warmer, more complicated? "This should do it," Sam said, holding up a piece of thick leather. He glanced up, catching her gaze, and for a moment neither of them moved or spoke. Something electric hung in the air between them. Eleanor was the first to look away, her cheeks flushing deeper. "We should fix that pump before dinner," she murmured. The moment passed, but its echo lingered in the subsequent days. They moved around each other with new awareness, careful to maintain the professional arrangement that had served them well. Yet Sam found excuses to teach Eleanor to ride better, his hands steady on her waist as he helped her mount. And Eleanor took special care with the meals she prepared, noting which dishes brought the greatest appreciation to Sam's face. In July, a letter arrived from Boston that shattered the peaceful routine they had established. Eleanor's father had died, leaving complicated business affairs that required her immediate attention. The family solicitor strongly urged her return east as soon as possible. "Will you go?" Sam asked that evening after she had shown him the letter. He struggled to keep his voice neutral, though the thought of her leaving created a hollow feeling in his chest. Eleanor folded the letter carefully, her expression troubled. "I should. There are responsibilities, arrangements to be made." She hesitated, but the thought of returning to Boston— "You don't have to decide tonight," Sam offered gently. "Take some time to consider." But the decision was made for them the following week when a sudden summer storm brought disaster to the ranch. Lightning struck the barn while Sam was inside, tending to a mare about to foal. Eleanor, watching from the house, saw the roof explode into flames and ran without thinking, her heart in her throat. She found Sam unconscious near the barn door, a fallen beam pinning his leg. The pregnant mare was whinnying frantically in her stall as smoke filled the building. With strength born of desperation, Eleanor dragged Sam clear of the barn before rushing back for the terrified horse. By the time neighbors arrived to help fight the fire, Eleanor had managed to save Sam, the mare, and 2 other horses. The barn, however, was beyond salvation. Sam regained consciousness to find himself lying in his bed, with Eleanor's worried face above him and his legs splinted and bandaged. "The horses?" he asked immediately, trying to sit up. "Safe," Eleanor assured him, gently pressing him back down. "The barn is lost, but all the animals made it out." Relief flooded his features. "And you?" Eleanor showed him her hands, blistered from the rope burns she'd suffered leading the panicked horses to safety. "Nothing serious." Sam captured her wrist with gentle fingers, his thumb brushing over the unmarred skin. "You could have been killed going back in there," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "So could you," she replied softly, "but we're both still here." The loss of the barn was a significant setback for the small ranch. Sam's injuries meant he couldn't work for at least 6 weeks, and the approaching fall roundup required all hands. Eleanor postponed any decision about returning to Boston, throwing herself into managing the ranch operations while Sam recovered. She hired 2 local boys to help with the heavy work, learned to mend fences herself, and somehow kept the accounts balanced despite the unexpected expenses. Each night, she would sit with Sam on the porch, updating him on the day's progress and seeking his advice on decisions that needed making. These quiet evenings changed them both. As summer faded into fall, their conversations deepened, moving beyond ranch matters to shared confidences. Sam spoke of his childhood in Missouri, his years fighting in the war, and the restlessness that had driven him west. Eleanor told him of her mother's early death, her father's remote affection, and the suffocating expectations of Boston society. "I never felt I belonged there," she admitted one evening as they watched the sunset paint the hills in gold and crimson. "Always too outspoken, too curious about the wrong things." "And here," Sam asked quietly, "do you feel you belong in California?" Eleanor turned to look at him, the fading light softening her features. "I feel I belong here more than anywhere I've ever been," she answered truthfully. The air between them hummed with unspoken feelings, but Sam, ever honorable, would not take advantage of their situation while she remained in his employment and he in her care. Instead, he channeled his growing affection into small gestures, having a rocking chair delivered for the porch where she liked to read, ensuring the boys he hired treated her with absolute respect, listening intently to her ideas for improving the ranch operations. By October, Sam was back on his feet, though he still favored his injured leg. The new barn was nearly complete, thanks to the help of neighboring ranchers who had pitched in with labor and materials. The fall roundup had been successful, with more calves than Sam had dared hope for. The question of Eleanor's return to Boston hung unspoken between them until the evening a second letter arrived from the family solicitor, more urgent than the first. Her presence was required to settle the estate before winter made travel difficult. "I can't put it off any longer," Eleanor said that night as they sat by the fire. "I need to face my past before I can truly move forward." Sam nodded, his heart heavy but his voice steady. "When will you leave?" "The stage from Knights Ferry departs in 3 days," she replied, not meeting his eyes. "I've already written for a ticket." The next 2 days passed with painful awareness of impending separation. Eleanor prepared detailed instructions for managing the household in her absence, though both avoided any mention of whether her departure was temporary or permanent. On her final evening at the ranch, Sam asked Eleanor to join him for a ride to the western ridge, where the view stretched all the way to the distant mountains. They sat side by side on a fallen log, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. "I have something for you," Sam said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small wooden box hand-carved with a pattern of oak leaves. "I made this while I was laid up with my leg." Eleanor accepted it with trembling fingers, opening it to find a simple silver ring set with a small blue stone. "Sam," she whispered, looking up at him in confusion. "It's not what you might think," he said quickly, a rare flush coloring his tanned face. "Or rather, it could be someday if you wanted, but for now it's a promise." "What kind of promise?" she asked, her heart beating wildly. Sam took a deep breath. "A promise that you'll always have a place here, whether you decide to return or not. This ranch has become a home since you arrived, Eleanor, and I've become a better man for knowing you." Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes. "I don't know when I'll be able to return," she admitted. "The solicitor's letters suggest the affairs are quite complicated." "I understand," Sam said, though the thought of months without her felt like an approaching winter. "Just know that whenever you're ready, there's a place for you here." Eleanor closed her fingers around the ring. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." The morning of her departure arrived cold and clear. Sam drove her to Knights Ferry in the wagon, their conversation sporadic and strained by everything left unsaid. At the stage depot, Eleanor handed him an envelope. "Don't open this until you get back to the ranch," she instructed, her voice wavering slightly. Sam nodded, helping her onto the stage with careful hands that lingered perhaps a moment too long on her waist. "Safe travels, Eleanor," he said, stepping back as the driver called for passengers. "Goodbye, Sam," she replied, her eyes holding his until the stage pulled away in a cloud of dust. The ranch felt unbearably empty when Sam returned. He moved through the silent rooms, all too aware of Eleanor's absence in every corner. Finally, he sat at the kitchen table and opened the envelope she had given him. Inside was a letter and a bank draft that made his eyes widen in shock. The letter explained that Eleanor had arranged for her Boston inheritance to fund the rebuilding of the barn and expansion of the ranch, should he accept it. "Consider it an investment in our future," she had written, the word "our" underlined with a deliberate hand. The winter months passed with aching slowness. Sam threw himself into improving the ranch, using the unexpected funds to purchase adjacent land and expand his herd. Each improvement was made with Eleanor in mind: the enlarged kitchen with its new cast iron stove, the second bedroom added to the main house, the small library filled with books she might enjoy. Letters traveled between California and Massachusetts, each one growing more personal than the last. Eleanor wrote of her frustration with Boston society and her determination to settle her father's affairs as quickly as possible. Sam shared news of the ranch and his growing conviction that his future happiness depended on her return. By February, the exchange of letters had evolved into an open courtship conducted across 3,000 miles. Sam no longer pretended his feelings were merely those of friendship, and Eleanor abandoned the formal restraint that had characterized their earlier relationship. "I find myself thinking of you at all hours," she wrote in late February. "The solicitor assures me we are nearly finished with the estate matters. I have already purchased my ticket west for March 15th. Sam read and reread that letter until the paper grew soft at the creases. He threw himself into final preparations for her return, wanting everything to be perfect when she arrived. The ranch hands exchanged knowing glances, but said nothing about their boss's uncharacteristic attention to domestic details. On the appointed day, Sam waited at the Knights Ferry stage depot, his hat in his hands and his heart in his throat. When the stage finally appeared on the horizon, he could barely stand still. The minutes until it rolled to a stop seemed to stretch into eternity. And then she was there, stepping down from the coach with a radiant smile that outshone the spring sunshine. Sam crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides, propriety forgotten as he swept her into his arms. "Welcome home," he murmured against her hair. Eleanor's arms tightened around his neck. "I never truly left," she whispered back. "My heart stayed here with you." They married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the ranch with only their closest neighbors in attendance. Eleanor wore a dress of pale blue, silk, her one concession to Boston fashion, with Sam's silver ring on her finger and wildflowers in her hair. That night, as they stood together on the porch of what was now their shared home, Sam marveled at the twists of fate that had brought them together. "If that fire hadn't started while you were locked in the cellar," he said thoughtfully, "I might have ridden right through Knights Ferry without ever knowing you existed." Eleanor shivered slightly at the memory, leaning into the solid warmth of her husband's embrace. "I used to think it was the worst night of my life," she admitted. "Now I see it was the beginning of everything good." Sam turned her gently to face him, his expression suddenly serious. "I want you to know something, Eleanor Marshall," he said, still savoring the sound of her new name. "I may have carried you out of that cellar, but you've been saving me every day since." She rose on her tiptoes to press her lips to his. "Then we're even," she whispered against his mouth, "and we have the rest of our lives to keep rescuing each other." The ranch flourished under their combined care, as did their love for one another. By the following spring, Eleanor was expecting their first child, and Sam had become one of the most respected ranchers in the county. They faced challenges: drought seasons, cattle thieves, the ordinary hardships of frontier life, but always as a united front, drawing strength from the bond that had begun on that fiery night in Knights Ferry. Their daughter, Catherine, was born in the winter of 1880, followed by twin sons, William and James, 2 years later. The children grew up strong and happy, raised with stories of courage and second chances, of fires survived and love that built something beautiful from the ashes. On their 10th anniversary, Sam surprised Eleanor with a special gift, the deed to the land where the old general store had once stood in Knights Ferry. In its place, they built a new mercantile establishment that quickly became the heart of the community, known for its fair prices and the kindness of its owners. "Full circle," Eleanor remarked on the day they opened the store's doors for the first time. "From being locked in a cellar beneath a store to owning one," Sam squeezed her hand. "The best kind of justice," he agreed. They never forgot how their story began with fire and fear and a desperate rescue. But as the years passed, that night became just the opening chapter in a much larger, richer narrative. The story of Samuel and Eleanor Marshall became part of local legend, passed down through generations as an example of how love could transform even the darkest circumstances into something beautiful and enduring. On warm summer evenings, they would often sit together on the porch of their ranch house, watching their children play in the golden light. In those moments, with Eleanor's head resting on his shoulder and their hands intertwined, Sam knew with absolute certainty that running into that burning building had been the best decision of his life. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if our paths hadn't crossed that night?" Eleanor asked him once as they watched the sun set behind the hills they both loved so dearly. Sam shook his head, drawing her closer. "No," he said simply. "Because even if it hadn't been that night, I believe we would have found each other somehow. Some things are just meant to be." Eleanor smiled, thinking of the long journey that had brought her from that smoke-filled cellar to this peaceful porch, surrounded by the family and life they had built together. "Yes," she agreed softly, "some things are just meant to be." As the years passed, their love story became woven into the fabric of Knights Ferry and the surrounding countryside. They celebrated 20 years together, then 30, watching their children grow into adults who carried forward the values they had instilled: courage, compassion, and an unwavering belief in second chances. The Marshall Ranch expanded to become one of the largest operations in the county, known for its progressive practices and fair treatment of workers. Eleanor's business acumen transformed their modest beginning into a thriving enterprise that supported not just their family but many others in the community. In 1913, surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and a lifetime of memories, Samuel and Eleanor celebrated their 35th wedding anniversary. The celebration was held on the same ridge where Sam had given Eleanor the silver ring she still wore every day. As the younger generations danced and laughed around them, the couple stood hand in hand, looking out over the land that had witnessed their love story from its dramatic beginning to this peaceful present. "Not bad for a drifter and a shopgirl," Sam said with a grin that, despite the silver in his hair, still held all the charm that had first captured Eleanor's heart. "Not bad at all," she agreed, her green eyes bright with joy as she gazed up at the man who had once carried her from flames and into a life more fulfilling than she could ever have imagined. Their legacy lived on long after they were gone, in the ranch that bore their name, the descendants who carried their blood, and the story that continued to inspire of a fire, a locked cellar door, a brave cowboy, and the enduring love that rose from the ashes of what might have been tragedy. For Samuel and Eleanor Marshall, that fateful night in 1878 wasn't an ending, but a beginning, the first page of a love story that would span decades and touch countless lives with its simple but profound message. That even in our darkest moments, rescue can come in unexpected forms, and from the most desperate circumstances can bloom the most beautiful love of all.